Picture yourself hovering over a small blue planet with a clipboard, 3 eyes, and a job to do. You are a xenozoologist, and your task this cycle is to catalog the mating signals of the dominant ground ape, the loud one that builds boxes and points glowing rectangles at its own face. You have already logged the usual things. They display wealth, they sing at each other, they exchange small, shiny objects, which seems reasonable. And then you witness the behavior that breaks your pen. 2 of them lean in. They stop their conversation, tilt their heads at a careful angle, and press the wet front openings of their bodies together. The same openings you note in your log, through which they take in air and push in food. They hold this contact. Sometimes they push the soft muscle they use for speech into the other one's opening and move it around. And here's the part that makes you scratch your third eye with your stylus. They do not file this under hygiene or feeding or accident. They file it at the very top, above gifts, above song. They call it the truest thing 2 of them can do. They build entire mythologies around it. They will cross oceans for the chance to do it with one specific individual. You write the obvious conclusion first, because it seems easy. This must be instinct. It must be wired in, automatic, universal. The kind of behavior every member of the species performs the way they all breathe and blink and pull their hand off a hot surface. A thing so central to their idea of love surely runs in all of them, in every camp and city and frozen coastline. An unbroken signal humming under the whole species like a heartbeat. So you do what a good scientist does. You check. You spread your survey across the planet, across the cold north and the deep forests and the river valleys and the high plains, and you start counting which groups press their food holes together and which do not. And the count comes back wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong in a way that tips your whole report onto the floor. Because it isn't all of them. It isn't even most of them in the way you expected. When researchers on this very planet ran exactly this survey, a real one, published by anthropologists Jankowiak, Garcia, and Volsche in the journal American Anthropologist in 2015, they went looking for the romantic, lover's version of this act across a huge spread of human cultures. Not the peck on a baby's head, the real thing, the one tied to desire. And in a striking share of those societies, they could not find it at all. Whole peoples, living full lives, falling in love, raising children, burying their dead with care, who simply do not do this thing you are about to call universal. For them, it isn't romantic. It isn't sacred. In some places, as you'll see, it was looked at with open disgust, the way you might look at someone licking a door handle. Sit in that for a moment as the alien, because the alien is the only one in this story without a bias. You arrived assuming the kiss was bedrock, the floor under human love, too deep to question, and the data just told you the floor has holes in it. Large ones. If a behavior were truly hardwired, the way a sneeze or a flinch is hardwired, you would not find entire continents of people who never developed it and a few who actively recoil from it. Instinct doesn't take a vote. Instinct doesn't check your postal code. A reflex shared by the whole species does not politely skip half the map. Which means the thing humans treat as the most natural, least examined gesture they own, the one they perform without a single thought, eyes closed, as if their bodies always knew how, cannot be the simple animal certainty they assume it is. Something more interesting is going on. Something with a history. The closed eyes aren't instinct switching on. They might be a habit switching off the questions. And that's the crack we're going to push our fingers into. Not do humans kiss? Obviously some do, possibly including you, possibly within the last day. The real puzzle is sharper and stranger than that. If this gesture isn't a universal reflex stamped into the species, then where on earth did it actually come from? Who started it? How old is it? What is it secretly doing to the body that does it? And why did so much of humanity look at the whole idea and decide, firmly, no thank you? The alien sets down the clipboard, because to answer that, you can't start with humans at all. You have to go further back than the first city, further back than the first word ever pressed into clay, back to a mouth that wasn't human yet, to a mother and a mouthful of food, and a gesture that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with staying alive. Leave the city behind and stand at the edge of a nest. A bird drops out of the sky with her throat full, and her chicks erupt, beaks gaping, necks straining, the whole brood screaming to be first. She leans down and pushes the food directly from her mouth into the open mouth of her young, a warm, wet handoff of half-digested meal, beak to beak, and not one creature in that nest finds it strange. It is simply how the small ones eat before they can hunt. Now hold that image and pull the camera back, slowly, the way a patient documentary does. The nest becomes a hut. The beak becomes a human face. And the mother leaning in to push softened food from her own mouth into her child's is no longer a bird at all. She is one of us, and she has been doing this for a very, very long time. This is real, and it has a clumsy name: pre-mastication or kiss feeding. Across many human societies, before there were blenders or soft jars of mush, a parent would chew food down to a paste and pass it mouth to an infant whose own teeth hadn't arrived yet. It kept babies alive through the most dangerous window of their lives. And here is where one idea about the kiss begins to whisper. Some researchers have proposed, and I want to flag this clearly as a hypothesis, one possible origin among several, not a proven fact, that the romantic kiss might be a distant echo of that feeding gesture, that the lover's lean carries, buried inside it, the muscle memory of a mother and a mouthful of food. It's a seductive idea precisely because it's so unsentimental. The most romantic act you know, descended from baby food. Maybe. We genuinely don't know, and anyone who tells you it's settled is selling something. But pre-mastication is only one thread, and on its own, it would make the kiss a human invention, a habit built on top of parenting. The deeper problem is that the gesture is older than humans, far older. You don't have to imagine the ancestral mouth. You can go to the zoo and watch your cousins do it. Bonobos and chimpanzees, the two species closest to us on the whole tree of life, kiss. Not a poetic stretch of the word. They press their mouths together, and bonobos in particular will do it open-mouthed, tongue and all, to calm each other after a fight, to reassure, to reconnect. Charles Darwin noticed this branch of the puzzle as far back as 1872, when he cataloged how humans across the world press, rub, and sniff at each other in greeting, kissing in some places, nose-rubbing or smelling in others, and treated it as one family of related behaviors rather than a single fixed act, which lands us somewhere uncomfortable and fascinating. The raw material of the kiss, bringing your face to another body, tasting it, sampling it, using closeness itself as a message, is not a human invention at all. It's mammalian inheritance. It was running in our ancestors before we had language to name it, before we had cities to celebrate it, before we were anything you'd recognize as people. And that is exactly where the whole story should fall apart in your hands. Because look at what we've just assembled. The roots go down through our parenting. They go down past our species entirely, into the apes, into deep evolutionary time, into a behavior so old it predates the human face itself. Everything points the same direction. This should be bedrock. This should be the one gesture every human group inherited and kept, the way they all inherited and kept fear and laughter and grief. Except, you already know the crack from before. They didn't. That's the wound in the middle of this whole investigation, and now it's twice as deep. It would be one thing if the kiss were a recent fashion, a quirk that some clever culture dreamed up last week and others simply hadn't heard of yet. You could shrug at that. Fashions don't spread evenly. Fair enough. But that's not the situation. The deep machinery is in all of us. The apes have it. The inheritance is shared. The hardware shipped with the species. So how do you explain a behavior with roots that ancient and that universal, that nonetheless went missing across whole regions of the human world? How do you lose something that's wired so far down? Whole peoples didn't fail to discover the kiss. They had the same primate equipment as everyone else, the same mouths, the same nerves, the same ancestors swinging through the same deep past. And some of them, looking at the gesture, didn't say, "We never thought of that." They said something much stranger. To find out what they said, and to find the first time in all of human history that anyone bothered to write this gesture down, we have to leave the forest and the nest behind and go digging in the dirt of the world's oldest cities, where two married scientists were about to pull the kiss out of a 4,500-year-old block of clay. There's a particular kind of magic in a clay tablet, and it's worth feeling before we use it. Paper rots. Skin and breath and the warmth of a moment vanish the instant they happen. But wet clay, pressed with a reed and then baked hard by accident in a house fire or on purpose in a kiln, can sit in the ground for thousands of years and come back up holding the exact thoughts of someone who has been dust since before the pyramids were old. Cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script of ancient Mesopotamia in what's now Iraq and Syria, is the oldest writing we can still read. And inside it, people wrote down everything. How much barley they owed, which god was angry, who they were sleeping with, and, it turns out, how they kissed. Picture the team that found this. A married pair of researchers, one who reads dead Mesopotamian languages for a living, an Assyriologist, and one trained in biology, leaning over tablets in a museum drawer, doing the slow, unglamorous work of reading other people's 4,000-year-old private lives. In 2023, they published their findings in the journal Science, and the finding rearranged the calendar of the kiss. Because before them, the earliest clear record of a romantic, lover's kiss was usually traced to South Asia, to texts from around 1500 BCE, old certainly. But these clay tablets pushed the date back roughly 1,000 years further, to at least 2500 BCE, 4,500 years ago, in Sumerian and Akkadian. People in the first cities, writing about lovers leaning in, about kissing tied plainly to desire and marriage. 1,000-year jump backward in a single study. Now, the romantic temptation here is enormous, and we're going to resist it on purpose, because resisting it is the whole point. It's easy to read earliest written record, 2500 BCE, and quietly hear, "This is when humans started kissing." Don't. Those are two completely different claims, and the gap between them is where honest science lives. Writing is barely 5,000 years old. The kiss, as we saw in the apes and the deep past, is vastly older than that. What changed at 2500 BCE wasn't the behavior. It was that someone finally had a way to record it. The researchers themselves were careful about this. The earliest record of a thing is not the birth of the thing. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. For every kiss pressed into clay, there were 100,000 never written down, in cultures with no writing at all, dissolving the moment they ended. The tablet doesn't tell us when the kiss began. It tells us the kiss was already ordinary enough, 4.5 millennia ago, that people bothered to mention it like the weather. And once writing exists, the kiss starts doing jobs that have nothing to do with romance, which is the next strange turn. Walk forward into Rome, and you find a civilization so precise about kissing that it built a vocabulary for it, 3 separate words for 3 separate acts. The osculum was the polite peck, the greeting kiss on the cheek or hand. The basium sat closer to home, the affectionate kiss between family and spouses, and the savium was the other one, the open, hungry, passionate kiss, the kind that wasn't for relatives. Same gesture, 3 social meanings, 3 names, sharply sorted. And in a society obsessed with rank, the kiss became a ladder. Where you were permitted to kiss the emperor announced your exact place in the pecking order. The favored kissed his cheek, and as your status fell, the target slid lower, down the hand, down toward the foot. A whole hierarchy mapped onto a single act of pressing lips to flesh. Imagine an office where your job title determined whether you may kiss the boss's cheek or must kiss his shoe, and you've roughly got the imperial court. There's an even quieter survival hiding in your own life. In an age when most people couldn't write their own name, a kiss could seal an agreement. Pressed to a document, it stood in for a binding word. A promise made physical. That habit is the ancestor of the little X people still scrawl at the bottom of a letter, the X that means a kiss. The mark you've used 100 times without thinking is a 2,000-year-old lip print that outlived the reason it was invented. You're carrying the Roman court's paperwork in your text messages. So the written record, when you finally dig it up, tells you something genuinely useful and genuinely limited at the same time. It proves the kiss is old in some places, woven deep into the first cities, formal enough to need 3 Latin words and a seating chart. What it cannot do, what no tablet can do, is tell you the gesture was everywhere. The clay only speaks for the people who wrote, and the people who wrote were a thin sliver of humanity clustered in a few river valleys. The rest of the map stayed silent, and that silence, it turns out, is not empty. It's the actual answer. Because when you finally stop asking when the kiss began and start asking where it lived and where it didn't, the mystery stops being a matter of dates on a timeline and becomes a matter of geography. The clue was never the calendar, it was the map. And the map is about to explain everything. It's the 1890s in southern Africa, and a group called the Thonga are watching Europeans do something with their faces, and they are not charmed. They're horrified. Here are these visitors pressing their mouths together, and the Thonga reportedly reacted with a disgust that was sharper than mere unfamiliarity. The way it was recorded, their verdict was brutally logical. Look at them. They're eating each other's saliva and dirt. Sit with how that lands, because they aren't wrong. Strip the romance away, and that is mechanically a fair description of what a kiss is. They simply hadn't been raised to read the gesture as love, so they saw exactly what was in front of them. 2 people swapping spit, and recoiled. And this wasn't some one-off reaction from the distant past. As recently as 1990, a Chinese newspaper warned its readers against kissing as a distasteful foreign import, a habit arriving from outside rather than welling up from within. That word, import, is the key turning in the lock. Because if the kiss were the pure human instinct the alien first assumed, it could not be an import. You don't import breathing. You don't import the flinch when something flies at your eye. Nobody warns a population against the foreign practice of blinking. The moment a behavior can cross a border, be adopted or refused, looked at by a whole people who then say no thank you. That behavior is not a reflex. It's a custom, and now we can put a real number on just how local this custom is. Return to that 2015 survey, the one the alien stumbled on, and look at the full result. The anthropologists examined a huge spread of human cultures, 168 of them, for the romantic, sexual kiss. They found it clearly present in fewer than half. In the rest, a slight majority, it was simply absent, not forbidden, not lost. Just never a part of how those people loved. And when you lay the findings over a map, the pattern sharpens into something almost embarrassingly clear. Among the foragers of the far north of Asia and North America, the kiss was nearly everywhere. But among the hunter-gatherers of sub-Saharan Africa, of New Guinea, of the Amazon, researchers found it essentially nowhere. Of the Central American cultures in the study, not a single one. Roughly 1/10 of all humanity, give or take, doesn't romantically kiss at all. And that 1/10 isn't scattered at random. It clusters. It maps. The kiss has a homeland and a frontier. So what decides which side of the frontier a culture lands on? This is the part that quietly rewrites the whole question. And it has nothing to do with climate or race or how much people love their partners. The strongest pattern the researchers found was social complexity. The more layered and stratified a society, the more it was carved into ranks, classes, haves, and have-nots, the more likely its people were to kiss romantically. Among the most complex, class-divided societies, the romantic kiss was overwhelmingly the norm. Among small, egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands, where nobody outranks anybody and life is lived shoulder to shoulder, it mostly just wasn't there. Don't let that slide past as a dry correlation, because it's the explanatory heart of the entire video. Picture two worlds. In the first, you live in a band of a few dozen, everyone known to you from birth, no walls between you and your neighbors, intimacy woven into every shared meal and shared shelter, closeness so constant that it needs no special private ritual to mark it. In the second, you live stacked in a city of strangers, sorted by rank, hemmed in by walls and status and the watching eyes of others, your private life genuinely private. And in that second world, a small, sealed, intensely personal act, a gesture you perform with one specific person behind a closed door, suddenly means something. It becomes a way to carve out the intimate from the public, to say this is ours, in a world built out of separation. The kiss flourishes where life is divided, because it's a tool for crossing the very distances that complex society creates. Egalitarian bands didn't fail to invent it. They never needed it. And there it is, the answer the alien came looking for, hiding in plain sight all along. The reason whole peoples don't kiss isn't that they missed the memo or lacked the equipment. They had the same mouths, the same ape ancestors, the same deep inheritance as everyone else. What they didn't have was the kind of society that promotes a tasting reflex into the language of love. The kiss isn't humanity's universal instinct. It's a custom that grew up alongside cities and classes and walls, and the people who don't do it aren't missing something. They're just living in a world that never asked the gesture to mean so much. Which puts a strange thought in your hands as you sit there. You who almost certainly were raised on the kissing side of the line, who learned to read this gesture as romance before you were old enough to question anything. How much of what feels like your deepest, most natural instinct is actually just the accident of which culture you happen to be born into? Think about your own first kiss. The nervous lean, the certainty that your body simply knew what to do. It didn't. It was taught by a civilization that decided this particular act would carry the weight of love. If that idea snags on something in you, sit with the snag and tell me in the comments which side of that frontier you grew up on. And stay, because there's one question left that the map can't answer. We know now why some cultures kept the kiss and some didn't. We know it's old, mammalian, promoted from biology into symbol, but we still haven't asked the most basic thing of all. When you actually do it, when two of you lean in and the world goes quiet, what is the kiss doing? What is the hidden job running underneath the romance, the one your body is performing whether you know it or not? Here's what's happening in your skull at the exact moment a kiss lands, and it's a lot more than poetry. Your lips are among the most densely nerve-packed patches of skin you own, a small surface wired with a wildly disproportionate share of your brain's attention so that the lightest contact there sends a flood of signal upward. And when it arrives, your brain doesn't treat it as a neutral fact. It treats it as a reward. It pours out dopamine, the chemistry of wanting and craving. Oxytocin, the chemistry of bonding and trust. Serotonin, tangled up in mood and obsession. That dopamine spike runs along the same reward circuitry, the same pathway, that lights up under cocaine or heroin. Not a claim that a kiss is a drug, a claim that your brain processes it using the very machinery it uses for the things people rearrange their lives around. You were, in a real sense, built to come back for more. But reward is only half the hidden job, and the other half is stranger and more clinical than romance would ever admit. Some researchers propose, flagging this clearly as a leading hypothesis, not a proven fact, that a kiss is also an audition, a close-range biological sample. Up that near, you're taking in another person's scent and taste, a flood of chemical information your conscious mind never reads but your body might. There's evidence that people tend to be drawn, without knowing why, to partners whose immune systems differ from their own, different versions of the genes that run immunity, a pairing that could give future children a broader set of defenses. So the kiss may be a likely job interview disguised as a tender moment, a test you didn't know you were administering for a position you didn't know was open, and it may not be idle. In one evolutionary psychology survey out of SUNY Albany, a majority of people, well over half of both men and women, reported ending a budding relationship because a kiss simply went wrong. Something said no through a channel they couldn't name. There's a grosser truth riding along, and it's earned its place. A single passionate kiss of about 10 seconds transfers something like 80 million bacteria between two mouths, according to a Dutch study published in the journal Microbiome. So the soulful image of two spirits meeting is, biologically, closer to two dense ecosystems performing a hostile merger, a vast microbial migration that the participants experience as tenderness. And before anyone connects that to disease and runs too far, the Mesopotamia researchers noted an ancient ailment whose symptoms loosely echo herpes, and were careful. They themselves doubted any tidy story where the kiss suddenly unleashed a virus on the world. It's a caution, not a culprit. We don't get to tie that bow. So let's name the whole thing in full now, once. The shape that's been assembling under every part of this. The kiss is biology promoted to symbol. It is not one thing. It's an ancient mammalian behavior, tasting, smelling, sampling another body, that some cultures lifted up into the language of love, and others never adopted at all. Your brain rewards it like a drug. Your culture taught you to read it as romance, and you never questioned either one. What feels like pure instinct is half inheritance and half invention, and you've been carrying both without noticing the seam. Which means the next time you lean in, you might feel the whole strange machine moving underneath you. You'll run an ancient chemical audition your mind long ago renamed romance. You'll fire the same reward pathway that drugs hijack, and your brain will quietly file the moment under do that again. You'll usher 80 million tiny passengers across in the space of 10 seconds. You'll perform a gesture your ape ancestors were already doing before there was a single human word for it. And you'll do it, ultimately, for one reason most people never learned, because you happen to be born into one of the cultures that kept the habit. Somewhere out there tonight, someone just as human as you, just as capable of love, is settling in beside the person they'd cross an ocean for, and it would never once occur to them to press their mouth to that person's mouth. They're not missing anything. You're not either. You're just both standing on different sides of a line drawn thousands of years ago, in cities neither of you will ever see, and calling your own side natural. So go ahead, close your eyes. You always do. Just know, this once, what you're actually closing them against. Not instinct switching on, but 4,000 years of invention you mistook for your own heartbeat. If this rewired something in how you see the most ordinary gesture you own, that's the whole reason this channel exists. To make the familiar strange again. Subscribe and stay a while. There's a lot of you that turns out to be older and weirder than you think.